In the autumn of 1932, a photograph surfaced in the estate sale of the Blackwood family home in rural Ohio. The image, sepia-toned and cracked with age, showed 13 family members arranged on the front porch of a grand Victorian mansion. What struck the auctioneer as peculiar wasn't the formal poses or the elaborate dress of the era, but rather the absence of any children over the age of 16. Dr. Margaret Hensley, a genealogist specializing in American family lineages, acquired the photograph along with a trunk of family documents. What she initially viewed as a routine research project would soon evolve into an investigation that challenged her understanding of mortality, genetics, and the very nature of inherited tragedy. The Blackwood family had settled in Millbrook County, Ohio, in 1847, when patriarch Jonas Blackwood purchased nearly 300 acres of fertile farmland along the Vermilion River. According to county records, Jonas and his wife Eleanor had established one of the most prosperous farming operations in the region, their wealth built upon innovative agricultural techniques and shrewd business investments. The family seemed blessed with fortune, their Victorian mansion a testament to their success, its ornate gables and wraparound porches speaking of prosperity and permanence. The property itself was remarkable for its natural abundance, soil that seemed to nurture any seed planted within it, springs that never ran dry even during the harshest droughts, and forests that teemed with wildlife in quantities that neighboring farms envied but could never replicate. Yet, as Dr. Hensley began her methodical examination of the family documents, a disturbing pattern emerged from the faded ink of birth and death certificates, medical records, and personal correspondence. The Blackwood children, without exception, had died before their 18th birthday. Jonas and Eleanor's first son, Thomas, had succumbed to what the family physician described as a wasting illness at the age of 17. Their daughter Mary followed 2 years later, expiring suddenly in her sleep at 16. The pattern continued with chilling consistency across 3 generations. William at 15, Sarah at 17, Benjamin at 16, each death accompanied by similar symptoms of gradual decline, inexplicable weakness, and ultimately peaceful but premature departure from life. The medical records, preserved in meticulous detail by family members who had grown increasingly desperate for answers, painted a picture of healthy children who began to fade as they approached their final years of adolescence. Dr. Harrison Porter, the family's longtime physician, had documented case after case of robust youngsters who displayed no signs of hereditary weakness until their 15th birthday, at which point a subtle transformation began. They would become withdrawn, reporting vivid dreams that seemed more real than their waking hours. Their appetites would remain normal. Their physical examinations revealed no abnormalities, yet something indefinable seemed to drain away from them day by day, like water slowly seeping through sand. Dr. Hensley's initial assumption centered on the medical limitations of the 19th century. Diseases that modern medicine could easily treat had claimed countless young lives during that era. She contacted the Millbrook County Historical Society, seeking additional records that might illuminate the cause of these recurring tragedies. What she discovered instead was a collection of increasingly desperate correspondence between family members and medical professionals from across the Midwest, each letter revealing the family's growing awareness that something beyond conventional illness was claiming their children. The letters spoke of consultations with specialists from Chicago, Cincinnati, and even as far away as Boston. Each physician had arrived at the Blackwood estate with confidence in their ability to diagnose and treat whatever ailment plagued the family's offspring. Each departed weeks later baffled by symptoms that defied medical classification. Dr. Cornelius Matthews, a renowned pediatric specialist from Johns Hopkins, had spent 3 months at the Blackwood mansion in 1878, documenting his observations in a journal that would later be donated to the County Historical Society by his estate. The Blackwood children present a medical enigma that challenges every principle of pathology I have studied, Dr. Matthews wrote. They exhibit robust health in every measurable aspect. Strong hearts, clear lungs, alert minds, yet something intangible seems to abandon them as they approach their 17th year. It is as if the very essence of life gradually withdraws from their bodies, leaving behind perfectly functioning biological systems that somehow lack the spark necessary to sustain existence. In a letter dated September 1889, Eleanor Blackwood wrote to her sister in Cincinnati, The doctors speak of consumption, of weak constitutions, of God's will, but they cannot explain why our children fade like autumn leaves, always in their 16th or 17th year, always with the same strange dreams that precede their decline. They speak of a woman in white who visits them in sleep, calling them to follow her into the woods behind our home. Yesterday, young Catherine mentioned the woman again, and I fear we are losing her as we lost all the others. She describes this figure with such clarity, such longing, that I sometimes wonder if she sees something that exists beyond the realm of dreams. The mention of shared dreams intrigued Dr. Hensley, who had encountered similar phenomena in her previous research into family histories, marked by unusual patterns of mortality. She returned to the trunk of documents with renewed focus, searching for additional references to these nocturnal visitations. What she found was a detailed journal kept by Jonas Blackwood himself, its leather binding cracked, but its contents meticulously preserved. The entries, spanning from 1850 to his death in 1901, chronicled not only the family's growing prosperity, but also their increasing desperation as child after child succumbed to the mysterious affliction. Jonas wrote with the precision of a man accustomed to documenting agricultural yields and business transactions, but his clinical tone gradually gave way to something approaching panic as the deaths accumulated. In an entry from October 1876, he described his son Michael's final weeks. The boy speaks constantly of the woman in white, claims she appears at the foot of his bed each night, beckoning him toward the forest. Doctor Morrison insists these are mere fever dreams, but Michael's temperature remains normal, his appetite hearty until the very end. It is as if something calls to him from beyond this world, and he lacks the strength to resist its summons. I have begun sleeping in his room, hoping to witness these visitations myself, but she appears only to him, always in the hours just before dawn, when the boundary between sleep and waking grows thin. The journal entries revealed that Jonas had attempted various methods to protect his children from whatever force was claiming them. He had consulted with priests, brought in specialists in nervous disorders, even hired guards to watch over his children during the night. Nothing had proven effective. The woman in white continued to appear in their dreams, and one by one they followed her call into death, with expressions of such peace that Jonas began to wonder if they were experiencing something beyond human understanding rather than suffering from any earthly malady. If you're as intrigued as we are by these secrets of the past, consider subscribing to not miss any of our future investigations. Dr. Hensley's research expanded beyond the immediate family documents. She contacted the Ohio Department of Health, hoping to access historical death records that might provide medical insights into the recurring pattern of mortality. What she discovered was that the Blackwood deaths had not gone entirely unnoticed by contemporary authorities. In 1893, the state had dispatched Dr. Cornelius Whitmore, a physician specializing in hereditary diseases, to investigate what local newspapers had begun referring to as the Blackwood curse. Dr. Whitmore's report, filed with the State Medical Board and forgotten for nearly 4 decades, provided a chilling account of his 3-month investigation. He had examined the surviving family members, conducted autopsies on recently deceased children, and interviewed neighbors and local physicians. His conclusions defied medical understanding of the era. The Blackwood children exhibit no signs of hereditary disease, no evidence of poisoning, no indication of infectious illness. Their deaths appear to result from what can only be described as a gradual cessation of the will to live, as if some external force systematically drains them of vitality during the crucial transition from childhood to adulthood. More disturbing were Dr. Whitmore's observations regarding the family's property. He noted that the deaths occurred exclusively among children who slept in the mansion's eastern wing, the section of the house that overlooked the dense woods bordering the Vermilion River. Children who spent extended periods away from the family home, visiting relatives or attending boarding schools, seemed to develop normally until their return to Millbrook County. Dr. Whitmore had documented several cases where Blackwood children showed no signs of the family affliction while living elsewhere, only to begin experiencing the characteristic dreams and gradual decline within weeks of returning to the ancestral estate. The physician's investigation had extended to the property itself. He had examined the soil composition, tested the water from the family wells, and even analyzed samples of air from various locations throughout the mansion. Every test had returned normal results, yet Dr. Whitmore became convinced that something in the environment of the Blackwood estate was responsible for the recurring tragedies. His report concluded with a recommendation that shocked Dr. Hensley. He suggested the family abandon their ancestral home and relocate to another region entirely. The Blackwoods had refused Dr. Whitmore's advice, and the deaths continued with mechanical precision. Dr. Hensley's investigation revealed that by 1920, the curse had claimed 23 children across 4 generations. The family's wealth, once substantial, had been gradually depleted by medical expenses, funeral costs, and failed attempts to find cures for their hereditary affliction. Jonas had invested thousands of dollars in experimental treatments, consultations with European specialists, and even expeditions to locate rare herbs and minerals rumored to possess healing properties. The surviving adults, traumatized by decades of loss, had become increasingly isolated from the surrounding community. Their grand mansion, once the site of elaborate social gatherings and harvest celebrations, had transformed into a monument to grief rather than prosperity. Neighbors reported that the Blackwoods rarely ventured beyond their property boundaries, and when they did, they carried themselves with the haunted demeanor of people who had witnessed too much sorrow to trust in happiness again. Local folklore had inevitably grown around the Blackwood tragedy, fed by the family's isolation and the community's inability to explain the recurring deaths. Dr. Hensley interviewed elderly residents of Millbrook County, collecting oral histories that revealed the community's evolving understanding of the family's plight. Mary Hutchinson, 92 years old and the daughter of the Blackwoods' former neighbors, recalled childhood warnings about venturing too close to the Blackwood property. "My grandmother used to tell us children that the woods behind their house were hungry, that they fed on young souls to keep their ancient trees alive. She said the woman in white was the spirit of someone who had been taken long ago, and now she served as a collector for whatever darkness lived in those woods." The woman in white appeared consistently in these local accounts, described as a figure of ethereal beauty who appeared to children on the threshold of adulthood. Witnesses described her as neither threatening nor comforting, but rather as an inevitable presence, like dawn or dusk, marking the transition between one state of being and another. Those who claimed to have seen her reported an overwhelming sense of peace, followed by an inexplicable desire to follow her deeper into the forest. Thomas Carlyle, who had worked as a groundskeeper for the Blackwood family in the 1890s, provided Dr. Hensley with the most detailed account of the supernatural phenomena surrounding the estate. Now 87 years old and residing in a Millbrook County nursing facility, Carlyle possessed vivid memories of his years in the Blackwood employment. He had witnessed 3 children succumb to the family curse during his tenure, and his descriptions of their final weeks provided disturbing insights into the nature of whatever force was claiming young lives. "They would change, you see," Carlyle told Dr. Hensley during their interview. "Not sick, mind you, but different, like they were listening to something the rest of us couldn't hear. I'd find them standing at the edge of the forest, just staring into the trees with this look of recognition, as if they were seeing old friends beckoning to them. And the dreams. Lord, the dreams they would describe. Always the same woman, always the same invitation to follow her deeper into the woods where something wonderful waited for them." Carlyle's account included details that had not appeared in any of the family documents. He described changes in the natural environment that preceded each death. Birds would abandon their nests in the trees surrounding the mansion. Domestic animals would refuse to venture onto the eastern portion of the property, and even the family dogs would whimper and hide when asked to accompany the children on walks through the woods. Most disturbing of all, Carlyle reported that the very air seemed to thicken with expectation in the days before a child's passing, as if the entire estate held its breath in anticipation of what was to come. Dr. Hensley's investigation took a personal turn when she decided to visit the abandoned Blackwood mansion in the spring of 1933. The property had stood empty since the death of the last family member, Constance Blackwood, who had succumbed to the family curse at the age of 17 in 1932. Local authorities had been unable to locate any surviving relatives, and the mansion had fallen into the care of the county, its rooms sealed and its grounds left to the encroachment of wilderness. The approach to the mansion revealed the extent to which nature had begun to reclaim the once manicured estate. Vines had engulfed the lower portions of the Victorian structure, their tendrils seeming to pull the building back toward the earth from which it had risen. The wraparound porches sagged under the weight of accumulated leaves and debris, and several of the ornate gables had partially collapsed, giving the mansion the appearance of a grand lady fallen into destitution. Walking through the empty halls, Dr. Hensley was struck by the preservation of the interior spaces. Furniture remained covered but intact. Family portraits gazed down from walls unmarred by vandalism, and children's toys lay scattered in bedrooms as if their owners had simply stepped away for a moment. The atmosphere inside the mansion was thick with the weight of accumulated sorrow, each room bearing silent testimony to the lives that had been cut short within its walls. In the eastern wing of the house, she discovered a nursery that had been converted into a shrine. Photographs of deceased children lined the walls, their faces captured in formal portraits that emphasized their youth and innocence. Beneath each photograph, careful handwriting recorded names, birth dates, and ages at death, never younger than 15, never older than 17. The shrine included personal mementos, favorite toys, items of clothing, books marked with passages that the children had particularly loved, creating a memorial that spoke of desperate parental love struggling to preserve some essence of lives that had ended far too soon. As Dr. Hensley examined the shrine, she noticed something that had escaped her attention in the historical records. The children's death dates followed a pattern more precise than she had initially recognized. They died not simply in their 16th or 17th years, but specifically during the week surrounding their birthdays, as if something waited for the anniversary of their birth to claim them. The realization sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the mansion's abandoned state. Adjacent to the shrine, she discovered a library that Jonas Blackwood had apparently used for his research into the family curse. Shelves lined with medical texts, theological treatises, and volumes on folklore and supernatural phenomena bore witness to his desperate search for understanding. Books on hereditary diseases sat alongside studies of demonic possession, while medical journals shared space with collections of ghost stories and accounts of supernatural encounters. Most intriguing was a section devoted entirely to the history of the land itself. Jonas had acquired maps dating back to the earliest European exploration of the region, treaties with Native American tribes, and geological surveys that detailed the unique properties of the soil and water systems that made the Blackwood property so remarkably fertile. Dr. Hensley spent hours examining these documents, beginning to understand that Jonas had suspected the connection between the land's abundance and the price extracted from his family. That evening, staying at a boarding house in the nearby town of Millbrook, Dr. Hensley experienced the first of what would become a series of increasingly vivid dreams. In these nocturnal visions, she found herself walking through the woods behind the Blackwood mansion, following a figure in white who moved with the graceful inevitability of flowing water. The woman never spoke, never turned to acknowledge her presence, but somehow conveyed a sense of ancient purpose, of ritual older than the settlement of Ohio itself. The dreams possessed a quality of hyper-reality that distinguished them from ordinary nocturnal fantasies. Dr. Hensley could feel the texture of bark beneath her fingertips as she steadied herself against trees, could smell the rich loam of the forest floor, and taste the metallic quality of air that seemed charged with supernatural energy. Most disturbing of all, she began to recognize landmarks within the dream landscape, fallen logs, distinctive rock formations, clearings marked by unusual arrangements of wildflowers that she later discovered corresponded exactly to features of the actual Blackwood property. As we delve deeper into these mysteries, we invite you to join our community of explorers of the inexplicable. Subscribe and become part of the search for truth. Dr. Hensley's research expanded to include the pre-settlement history of the land. County records indicated that Jonas Blackwood had purchased the property from the federal government, which had acquired it through treaties with local Native American tribes. Searching through ethnographic studies conducted by early anthropologists, she discovered references to the area that preceded European settlement by centuries. The Seneca people, who had hunted and traded throughout the region, possessed oral traditions regarding the forests along the Vermilion River. According to these accounts, certain groves were considered sacred but dangerous, places where the boundary between the world of the living and the realm of spirits grew thin. Young members of the tribe underwent vision quests in these woods, seeking spiritual guidance as they transitioned from childhood to adulthood. However, some never returned from these journeys, claimed by what tribal elders described as the White Mother, a spirit who collected young souls to maintain the balance between worlds. Dr. Hensley located Professor James Nighthorse at Ohio State University, an expert in Seneca oral traditions, whose grandparents had lived in the region during the final years before tribal relocation. Professor Nighthorse provided additional details about the spiritual significance of the land that would become the Blackwood estate. According to tribal memory, the area had served as a sacred site for generations, a place where the spirits of the deceased maintained connection with the living world through the medium of growing things. The White Mother was not considered evil by our ancestors, Professor Nighthorse explained during their lengthy interview. She was understood to be a necessary force, one who ensured that the energy of unfulfilled potential was returned to the earth to maintain the fertility of the living world. Young people who were chosen by her were seen as making the ultimate sacrifice for the survival of their community, their unrealized dreams, feeding the soil that would nurture future generations. The professor's accounts aligned disturbingly with the pattern of deaths at the Blackwood estate. The Seneca tradition spoke of young people who would begin to have visions of the White Mother during their 15th or 16th year, dreams that gradually became more compelling until the chosen individuals voluntarily entered the sacred grove to fulfill their destiny. Those who resisted the calling would sicken and die anyway, their refusal to participate willingly in the ancient covenant resulting in a slower, more painful transition to death. The parallels to the Blackwood curse were unmistakable, but Dr. Hensley struggled to understand how ancient spiritual traditions could manifest as modern medical phenomena. Her dreams, meanwhile, had intensified in both frequency and clarity. Each night she found herself drawn deeper into the woods, following the woman in white toward a destination that remained perpetually beyond reach. Upon waking, she felt an overwhelming sense of loss, as if she had been separated from something essential to her existence. Her investigation reached a crucial turning point when she discovered a letter hidden behind a loose floorboard in the Blackwood Mansion's library. The correspondence, written in 1901 by Jonas Blackwood shortly before his death, was addressed to his sole surviving son, Robert, who had managed to escape the family curse by permanently relocating to California in his 15th year. The letter revealed the true depth of Jonas's desperation and his final terrible discovery about the nature of their family's affliction. "My dear Robert," the letter began, "I write to you now with full knowledge that this may be my final correspondence. I have uncovered the source of our family's tragedy, though the knowledge brings no comfort, only a deeper understanding of the price we have paid for our prosperity. The woman who sold us this land in 1847, who claimed to be the widow of a previous settler, was no mortal being. I found her grave marker today dating to 1823, 24 years before our arrival. Yet I remember her clearly, remember her strange smile as she handed over the deed and spoke of the land's particular requirements." The letter continued with Jonas's growing realization that the Blackwood prosperity had come at a supernatural cost. The land had been unusually fertile, their crops consistently abundant, their livestock remarkably healthy. Seasons that brought drought and crop failure to neighboring farms seemed to have no impact on the Blackwood estate, as if their property existed within a pocket of perpetual agricultural blessing. But this abundance required payment in the form of young lives, a tithe of innocence that maintained the supernatural fertility of their acres. "She comes for them when they reach the age of potential," Jonas wrote, "when they stand on the threshold between childhood and adulthood, when their spirits burn brightest with unrealized possibility. This is when she can harvest what she needs to maintain her domain. We have been farmers not just of crops but of souls, Robert, and I fear there is no escaping the contract our ignorance sealed." The letter revealed that Jonas had attempted to break the supernatural covenant through various means. He had consulted with ministers, brought in practitioners of folk magic, and even tried to destroy the deed to the property in hopes of nullifying whatever agreement bound his family to the land. Nothing had proven effective. The White Mother continued her nocturnal visitations, and the children continued to follow her call with expressions of such peace that Jonas began to suspect they were experiencing something far more profound than death. Dr. Hensley's hands trembled as she finished reading the letter. The implications were staggering, challenging not only her understanding of the Blackwood tragedy, but her fundamental beliefs about the nature of reality itself. Yet even as her rational mind rejected the supernatural explanation, her dreams had begun to change in ways that suggested something beyond ordinary psychological phenomena. The woman in white now looked directly at her, extending a pale hand in invitation, her ageless face expressing neither malice nor benevolence, only an eternal patience that transcended human understanding. The transformation of her dreams coincided with physical changes that Dr. Hensley found increasingly difficult to ignore. She began to lose weight despite maintaining her normal appetite, developed a pallor that seemed to come from within rather than from any external cause, and found herself possessed by an overwhelming desire to spend time in wooded areas. Most disturbing of all, she began to experience moments of temporal displacement, finding herself standing at the edge of forests with no memory of how she had arrived there, as if something was drawing her toward the natural world with increasingly irresistible force. Her research into the Blackwood curse had begun to consume her life in ways that extended far beyond academic interest. She found herself unable to concentrate on other projects, incapable of discussing topics unrelated to the supernatural phenomena she had uncovered. Colleagues at the university began to express concern about her obsessive focus on what they considered a minor genealogical curiosity, but Dr. Hensley felt compelled to continue her investigation despite the toll it was taking on her health and professional relationships. The climax of Dr. Hensley's investigation came on a warm September evening in 1933, exactly 1 year after she had first encountered the Blackwood photograph. Unable to resist the compulsion that had been building for months, she returned to the abandoned mansion as darkness fell. The property seemed different in the moonlight, alive with subtle movements and whispered sounds that suggested the presence of forces invisible during daylight hours. She made her way to the eastern wing, to the shrine room, where the portraits of deceased children gazed down with eyes that seemed to follow her movement. The photographs, she now noticed, captured more than the formal poses typical of Victorian portraiture. Each child's eyes held an expression of anticipation, as if they were looking toward something wonderful that existed just beyond the camera's range. As midnight approached, Dr. Hensley felt a presence enter the room. The temperature dropped perceptibly, and the air took on a quality of expectation, as if the mansion itself was holding its breath. The moonlight streaming through the tall windows seemed to coalesce into a human form, solidifying gradually until she could distinguish the features that had haunted her dreams for months. She turned to see the woman in white standing in the doorway, no longer a figure from dreams, but a tangible presence in the physical world. The spirit was exactly as Jonas had described in his letter, exactly as the children had seen in their final weeks, ethereally beautiful, ageless, and radiating an otherworldly serenity that was both comforting and terrifying. Her dress seemed to be woven from moonlight itself, flowing and shifting with each movement, while her face possessed the timeless quality of classical sculpture brought to life. The woman spoke for the first time, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. "The compact must be maintained, Dr. Hensley. The land requires its tribute, but you are beyond the age of offering. You have served your purpose in understanding our agreement. Now you must choose. Walk away with your knowledge or join those who tend the boundary between worlds." Dr. Hensley realized that she stood at a crossroads that transcended academic research. The woman in white represented forces that predated human civilization, systems of exchange between the natural and supernatural worlds that operated according to laws far older than human understanding. The Blackwood children had not died of disease or genetic abnormality, but had been claimed by an entity that maintained the fertility of the land through the harvest of human potential. "Why children?" Dr. Hensley asked, finding her voice despite the overwhelming presence before her. "Why must innocence pay for prosperity?" The woman's smile was sad and ancient, containing depths of experience that stretched back to the dawn of human settlement. "Because innocence burns brightest, because potential unrealized possesses the greatest power to nourish what lies beneath the surface of your world. A life lived to completion offers little to sustain the roots of reality. But a life cut short, a future unharvested, provides the energy needed to maintain the balance between what is and what might be." Dr. Hensley understood then that the Blackwood curse was part of a system of exchanges that maintained the stability of existence itself. The supernatural fertility of the land, the abundance that had built the family's wealth, required payment in the form of unrealized potential. Each child claimed represented decades of unlived experiences, unfulfilled dreams, and uncompleted stories, energy that fed directly into the fundamental forces that shaped reality. The covenant was established long before your species learned to cultivate the soil, the woman continued, her voice carrying the weight of geological time. We who tend the boundary between worlds have always required offerings to maintain the fertility that allows life to flourish. Your ancestors understood this exchange, participating willingly in rituals that ensured the continuation of their communities. But modern humans have forgotten the true cost of abundance, believing that prosperity comes without price. The White Mother extended her hand toward Dr. Hensley, and for a moment the genealogist felt the overwhelming temptation to accept the invitation. In that ethereal touch, she sensed the promise of understanding that transcended human limitations, knowledge that would answer every question that had ever plagued her academic curiosity. But she also recognized that such understanding came at the cost of her connection to the mortal world, requiring her to join the eternal vigil that maintained the balance between life and death. "I choose to return to my world," Dr. Hensley said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I will carry this knowledge with me, and I will bear witness to the truth of what happens here." The woman in white nodded, her expression conveying approval rather than disappointment. "Then you will understand why the compact continues, why new families will be drawn to this place by prosperity they cannot explain. The cycle will repeat until humanity learns that all abundance carries a price, and that some bargains transcend the understanding of those who make them." As dawn approached, the White Mother began to fade like morning mist, but her final words lingered in the air with prophetic certainty. "Remember, Dr. Hensley, that knowledge carries its own burden. You have seen behind the veil that separates the world of the living from the forces that sustain it. This understanding will change you in ways that you cannot yet comprehend, and you may find that the boundary between observer and participant is not as clear as you once believed." Dr. Hensley left the mansion as sunrise broke over Millbrook County, but she carried with her a profound sense that her encounter with the supernatural had marked her in ways that would become apparent only with time. The drive back to her university position felt like a journey between worlds, each mile separating her further from the realm of the White Mother, but never truly allowing her to escape the implications of what she had witnessed. She never published her research on the Blackwood family, instead sealing her documents in a private archive with instructions that they remain closed for 50 years. The official explanation she provided to her academic colleagues was that the family records had proven too fragmentary to support meaningful genealogical conclusions, but privately, she recognized that some knowledge was too dangerous to share openly. The supernatural forces she had encountered operated according to laws that human society was not prepared to acknowledge, and she feared that widespread awareness of such phenomena might lead to attempts at exploitation that could have catastrophic consequences. Dr. Hensley relocated to a small college in New England, where she spent the remainder of her career studying genealogies of families marked by unusual longevity, as if seeking to understand the opposite extreme of the phenomenon she had encountered in Ohio. Her colleagues noted that she had developed an aversion to rural properties, particularly those with extensive wooded areas, and that she displayed an almost obsessive interest in the agricultural practices of historical communities. In her private journals, which would not be discovered until after her death in 1967, Dr. Hensley documented the long-term effects of her encounter with the White Mother. She described gradually developing an awareness of what she termed the underlying exchanges that govern the relationship between human prosperity and natural forces. She could sense when agricultural abundance came at supernatural cost, when communities had unknowingly entered into compacts that required payment in human lives. The Blackwood mansion stood empty until 1962, when it was purchased by a young family from Chicago, drawn by the incredibly fertile farmland and the remarkably low price of the estate. The Hendersons, David, a former agricultural engineer, and his wife Patricia, along with their 3 young children, had been searching for an opportunity to start their own farming operation. The Blackwood property offered everything they had dreamed of: rich soil that seemed to guarantee agricultural success, a substantial mansion that could house their growing family, and a price that made the entire venture financially feasible. Within 5 years, the Hendersons had established one of the most prosperous agricultural operations in the region. Their crops broke regional yield records year after year, their livestock won prizes at agricultural fairs throughout the Midwest, and their financial success allowed them to expand their holdings to include nearly all of the original Blackwood acreage. The local community welcomed the new family with enthusiasm, grateful to see the abandoned estate return to productive use after decades of neglect. The Henderson children thrived in their rural environment, developing into intelligent, healthy youngsters who seemed destined for bright futures. 12-year-old Sarah showed remarkable aptitude for mathematics and science, while 10-year-old Michael displayed artistic talents that impressed his teachers and suggested potential for a career in creative fields. 8-year-old Jennifer possessed an intuitive understanding of agricultural processes that amazed her parents and suggested she might follow in her father's footsteps as a successful farmer. The first indication that the Blackwood curse had not died with the original family came in the spring of 1967, when Sarah Henderson celebrated her 15th birthday. Within days of the celebration, she began experiencing vivid dreams that featured a beautiful woman who beckoned her toward the woods behind the family mansion. Initially, the Hendersons attributed these dreams to the excitement of adolescence and the stress of preparing for high school, but Sarah's descriptions of her nocturnal visitor soon became too detailed and consistent to dismiss as ordinary fantasy. The dreams intensified over the following months, and Sarah began to display the same gradual withdrawal from daily life that had characterized the final weeks of the Blackwood children. She lost interest in her academic studies, spent increasing amounts of time staring toward the forest that bordered the eastern edge of the property, and spoke with growing frequency about the woman in white who promised to show her wonders beyond human imagination. The first of the Henderson children died peacefully in her sleep, 3 days after her 17th birthday, her face expressing the same serene contentment that had marked the passing of every Blackwood child before her. Local authorities attributed the death to an undiagnosed heart condition, a tragic but explainable medical event that drew sympathy from the community but raised no suspicions about supernatural influences. The Henderson family, devastated but determined to continue their new life in Ohio, threw themselves into their farming operation with renewed dedication. The land responded with even greater abundance, their crops breaking regional yield records, their livestock becoming the envy of agricultural fairs throughout the Midwest. David Henderson attributed their success to improved farming techniques and his engineering background, never suspecting that the supernatural fertility of their property required payment in the form of young lives. The pattern established by the Blackwoods continued with mechanical precision, claiming Michael Henderson at the age of 16 and Jennifer at 17. Each death followed the same progression: dreams of the white mother beginning around the child's 15th birthday, gradual withdrawal from ordinary activities, increasing fascination with the woods behind the mansion, and finally, peaceful death that medical authorities attributed to undiagnosed natural causes. Dr. Hensley, now an elderly woman living in seclusion in Vermont, received occasional reports from colleagues who remained in Ohio. Each account confirmed her growing understanding that the Blackwood curse was not unique to a single family, but rather a manifestation of forces that operated wherever humans sought to extract abundance from the earth without understanding the true cost of their desires. The woman in white, according to these reports, continued her eternal vigil, appearing to children on the threshold of adulthood regardless of their family name or ethnic background. The supernatural compact that governed the fertility of the land recognized no distinctions between the Blackwoods and their successors. It required only that the price be paid in the form of young lives, unrealized potential that fed the mysterious forces maintaining the abundance of the Ohio soil. As additional families purchased portions of the original Blackwood estate over the following decades, the pattern of prosperity and tragedy repeated itself with disturbing consistency. Each new family experienced agricultural success beyond their expectations, financial prosperity that seemed to flow from the very soil they cultivated, and each family eventually faced the terrible choice between accepting the loss of their children or abandoning the source of their abundance. Some families chose to leave after losing their first child, selling their properties, and relocating to regions where supernatural forces did not govern the relationship between human effort and agricultural success. Others, too invested in their prosperity to abandon it, remained and paid the price demanded by the White Mother. Local genealogical records from the 1970s and 1980s document a disturbing pattern of premature deaths among adolescents whose families farmed the former Blackwood land, though medical authorities never identified any common cause for these tragedies. In her final years, Dr. Hensley often reflected on her encounter with the supernatural forces that shaped the Blackwood tragedy. She had witnessed evidence of systems of exchange that operated beyond human understanding, contracts written in the fundamental code of existence itself. The woman in white had offered her a choice between ignorance and terrible knowledge, and she had chosen to bear the burden of understanding rather than the comfort of denial. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of her discovery was the realization that such bargains were not aberrations, but fundamental aspects of the relationship between humanity and the natural world. Prosperity, abundance, and growth, all the markers of human success, required energy drawn from somewhere in the vast web of existence. The Blackwood curse had simply made visible a transaction that normally remained hidden beneath the surface of everyday life. Dr. Hensley's later research revealed that similar phenomena existed throughout the world, though most remained disguised as natural disasters, genetic disorders, or statistical anomalies. Families who prospered through agriculture in certain regions often experienced unusual patterns of mortality among their offspring. Entire communities that achieved remarkable abundance sometimes found themselves paying prices that their members never consciously acknowledged, losses attributed to coincidence rather than cosmic accounting. The tragedy of the Blackwood legacy extended beyond the immediate families who occupied the cursed land. Dr. Hensley discovered that the supernatural compact had created a cycle of attraction that drew new victims to the property with almost magnetic force. Real estate records showed that the former Blackwood estate changed hands with unusual frequency, each sale motivated by financial pressures created by the loss of children. Yet each new family found themselves irresistibly drawn to purchase property that rational evaluation should have marked as cursed. The White Mother's influence extended beyond the immediate boundaries of the original estate. Dr. Hensley's investigation revealed that adjacent properties experienced similar phenomena, though to a lesser degree. Children from neighboring farms began experiencing dreams of the ethereal woman during their adolescent years, though most managed to resist her call long enough to reach adulthood. Those who succumbed typically disappeared during camping trips or nature walks, their bodies found days later in peaceful repose among the trees, with no signs of violence or distress. Local authorities developed an unofficial policy of discouraging investigation into these disappearances, partly because of the lack of evidence suggesting criminal activity, but also because of an unspoken community understanding that some mysteries were better left unexplored. Millbrook County had learned to live with the presence of forces that transcended human understanding, adapting to the reality of supernatural influence through willful ignorance and careful avoidance of certain wooded areas. Dr. Hensley's journals from the 1950s documented her growing awareness that her encounter with the White Mother had marked her in ways that became apparent only with the passage of time. She began to experience what she termed sympathetic dreams whenever families with adolescent children moved onto properties connected to the original Blackwood estate. These nocturnal visions allowed her to witness the supernatural courtship process as the White Mother gradually drew new victims toward their destiny. The dreams revealed aspects of the supernatural compact that Dr. Hensley had not understood during her initial investigation. She learned that the White Mother was not acting independently, but serving as an agent for much older forces that had governed the relationship between human civilization and natural abundance since the dawn of agriculture. The entity operated according to laws that predated human history, maintaining balances that ensured the continued fertility of the earth through the carefully regulated harvest of human potential. Through these sympathetic visions, Dr. Hensley observed the White Mother's interactions with dozens of children over the decades following her initial investigation. Each encounter followed a similar pattern. The entity would appear first in dreams, presenting herself as a benevolent guide who offered to reveal secrets of the natural world. Gradually, her nocturnal visits would become more compelling, drawing the chosen child's consciousness away from the ordinary world and toward a realm where different laws governed existence. The children who answered the White Mother's call did not simply die, Dr. Hensley realized. They underwent a transformation that transcended ordinary concepts of mortality, their life force converted into energy that fed the supernatural systems maintaining the fertility of the land. In her dreams, she could see them existing in a state between life and death, their consciousness preserved within the vast network of natural forces that governed agricultural abundance. This revelation provided a new understanding of why the children faced their fate with such peace. They were not experiencing death in any conventional sense, but rather a translation into a different mode of existence, one that offered them direct participation in the fundamental processes that sustained life on Earth. The tragedy lay not in their transformation itself, but in the loss experienced by the families who could not follow them into this elevated state of being. Dr. Hensley's sympathy for the grieving families was tempered by her growing understanding that the supernatural compact served purposes that extended far beyond individual human desires. The energy harvested from the chosen children did not simply maintain the fertility of the former Blackwood estate, but contributed to a vast network of exchanges that ensured agricultural abundance throughout the region. The prosperity of countless farming communities depended upon the sacrifices made by a few families, though this connection remained invisible to those who benefited from it. The ethical implications of this discovery haunted Dr. Hensley throughout her later years. She possessed knowledge that could potentially save individual families from the tragedy of losing their children, yet she also understood that interfering with the supernatural compact might have consequences that extended far beyond the immediate victims. The White Mother had made clear that the ancient agreements governing agricultural fertility required payment in some form, and preventing the harvest of young lives might simply redirect the cost to other vulnerable populations. Her attempts to warn individual families proved largely unsuccessful. The supernatural influence that drew people to the cursed land also seemed to make them resistant to warnings about its dangers. Families who received her carefully worded letters either dismissed them as the ravings of an eccentric academic or found themselves unable to take action despite intellectually understanding the threat to their children. Hensley's final journal entry, written shortly before her death in 1967, reflected on the profound isolation that her knowledge had created. She had spent decades as the sole living witness to forces that shaped human destiny while remaining invisible to most observers. The burden of understanding had separated her from ordinary human society, making her a guardian of secrets that she could neither share nor forget. "I have lived for 34 years with the knowledge of what maintains the abundance that surrounds us," she wrote. "Every harvest festival, every celebration of agricultural prosperity, every expression of gratitude for fertile soil reminds me of the price that has been paid in young lives. I have watched families destroy themselves in pursuit of prosperity that comes at supernatural cost, and I have been powerless to intervene without potentially causing even greater tragedy." The journal entry continued with her final analysis of the Blackwood curse and its implications for human civilization. Dr. Hensley had come to believe that the supernatural compact represented a transitional phase in humanity's relationship with natural forces, a period during which ancient spiritual laws gradually gave way to more modern forms of exchange. She predicted that the influence of entities like the White Mother would eventually diminish as human society developed new technologies and social structures that eliminated the need for agricultural abundance based on supernatural intervention. However, she also warned that this transition would not come without cost. The gradual withdrawal of supernatural support for human prosperity would require communities to develop sustainable practices that could maintain abundance through purely natural means. Societies that had become dependent upon the hidden subsidies provided by entities like the White Mother would face difficult adjustments as these mysterious sources of support disappeared. The final decades of the 20th century seemed to validate Dr. Hensley's predictions. Reports of supernatural phenomena associated with the former Blackwood estate gradually diminished as urban development transformed the surrounding region. The dense forests that had served as the White Mother's domain were cleared for shopping centers and housing developments, disrupting the natural conditions that had maintained the supernatural compact for centuries. The last documented appearance of the White Mother, occurred in 1987, when 16-year-old Marcus Chen reported dreams of a woman in white who beckoned him toward a small grove of trees that had been preserved as part of a suburban park development. Unlike the previous victims of the entity's influence, Marcus possessed knowledge of the local legends surrounding the former Blackwood property. His family had purchased their home specifically because of its connection to the area's agricultural heritage, but they had also researched the historical patterns of unusual mortality among local adolescents. Marcus's parents responded to his dreams by immediately relocating their family to a different state, breaking the supernatural connection before the white mother could complete her claim. Their departure marked the end of an era, as subsequent development of the region eliminated the natural conditions that had supported the entity's presence for over a century. Yet even as the specific manifestation of the supernatural compact that had plagued the Blackwood family finally came to an end, Dr. Hensley's research suggested that similar phenomena continued to operate in other regions where human prosperity remained dependent upon mysterious sources of abundance. Her private correspondence with colleagues around the world documented cases of families experiencing unusual patterns of loss in areas known for exceptional agricultural fertility, suggesting that the forces she had encountered in Ohio represented just one example of a much larger system of exchanges between human civilization and supernatural influences. Modern agricultural science had begun to provide alternative explanations for the exceptional fertility that had once required supernatural intervention. Advances in soil chemistry, genetic modification of crops, and precision farming techniques offered the possibility of abundance that did not depend upon hidden subsidies extracted from human lives. Yet Dr. Hensley's work suggested that the transition from supernatural to purely scientific agriculture would require careful management to avoid disrupting balances that had maintained ecological stability for millennia. The legacy of the Blackwood family serves as a reminder that human prosperity has often come at costs that remain hidden from those who benefit from it. The beautiful mansion that once housed generations of doomed children now stands as a monument to the complexity of the relationship between human ambition and natural forces. The fertile fields that once demanded payment in young lives continue to produce abundant crops, but their productivity now depends upon fertilizers and irrigation systems rather than supernatural intervention. As we consider the full scope of the Blackwood tragedy, we must acknowledge that the questions it raises extend far beyond the specific circumstances of one cursed family. The story challenges us to examine the hidden costs of our own prosperity, to consider what prices we might be paying without conscious awareness, and to ask whether our modern abundance truly comes without supernatural subsidy, or whether we have simply become more skillful at hiding the exchanges that sustain our way of life. The past guards secrets that challenge comprehension, and what we've uncovered in the shadows of the Blackwood legacy reveals that some mysteries span generations, not as folklore, but as living truth. Perhaps the real question isn't whether ancient compacts between worlds still govern our reality, but whether we have the courage to recognize the prices our prosperity has demanded across centuries of willful blindness. The true nature of this legend remains in the shadows, but we want to know your opinion. Use the comments section below and tell us what you believe. If you are fascinated by unraveling the secrets behind our darkest histories, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications, for there is much more to be unmasked.